Diana Magnay, great to have you with us. You're in America. Tell me, what's the most American thing that has happened to you reporting from here?
So I think that was before Trump was elected.
hmm
I had some time then because we weren't in Trumpland, and I went to the hairdresser,
hmm
obviously not in working hours. And Hunter Biden had just been pardoned,
hmm
and everybody in the hairdresser started talking about this. I don't know how it started, but it was just a pile-in. And I've been in Russia for a long time. Nobody talks. Nobody talks to you. I mean, I couldn't talk back, but I loved that. Just strangers just
Yeah,
having their bit. I love that.
they do
That's
that,
very
Americans, don't they?
American.
I was scootering to work one day, stopped at the lights, started whistling the opening riff to "Smoke on the Water." You know that tune?
No, do you want to whistle it? Do,
So I
do. Yeah, good.
did, yeah. So I'm whistling this, and there was a woman waiting to cross the road. She started up, I know that song. You'd never get that in Britain. I'm James Matthews, and you're listening to day 47 of Trump 100. Joining me today is our correspondent on special US reporting duties, Diana Magnay.
Hello, James. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here again.
Yeah, great to have you. Mark is on assignment. More about that tomorrow. Martha continues her holiday, has been trolling us on Instagram relentlessly all week. But Diana, you're here, and you've been speaking to US-based Ukrainians, yeah?
That's right, because there are rumors that the Trump administration is considering revoking the legal status in this country of 240,000 Ukrainians who've fled here since the war with Russia. So I've been to meet some of them.
And just when you thought you'd heard the last of tariffs, brace yourself. Diana, you, of course, were Sky's Moscow correspondent for how many years?
6.
6 years. You've been in the room with Vladimir Putin, and, we'll get into that because you have a perspective that not many have. But for now, you're here in Washington covering Ukraine because that's the big issue here.
Yes. And the more every day goes by, you see Donald Trump seeming to favor Russia over Ukraine.
Yeah.
And he's putting the thumbscrews on Ukraine as though Ukraine is the guilty one here and not Russia who invaded it. And this pausing of military aid, the pausing in intelligence sharing, all of this is so damaging for Ukraine right now. And then just to add insult to injury, I was thinking about that phrase, and it's an understatement, really. This idea that those Ukrainians who came here, who fled the war and have been granted temporary legal status, that he might revoke that. We don't know if he will. Caroline Levitt, his press secretary, addressed this reporting that came from Reuters, saying it's more fake news from Reuters based on anonymous sources who have no idea what they're talking about. The truth, no decision has been made at this time, she wrote in a post on X. But that does mean clearly that it's under review, that they're thinking about making a decision on it.
Yeah, that's a curious phrasing, isn't it? I'm not sure I'd be entirely comfortable if I was a Ukrainian refugee. The answer they want to hear is this is emphatically untrue. And put it together with how Trump has dealt with Ukraine as an issue, sending refugees back, it would be entirely keeping with this kind of punitive approach. But you've been to Silver Spring, yeah, speaking to some of the people at the heart of this story.
That's right. We met a couple of Ukrainian refugees, Valentin and Maxim. They work for a NGO here that helps get humanitarian supplies for people in Ukraine. Valentin's actually from Kyiv, which is where Zelensky is from, and which was attacked last night by Russian cruise missiles,
Right.
killing 4 people who were in a hotel there. And he said, it is US Patriot missiles that defend us against cruise missile and ballistic missile attack from Russia. And that's exactly what is going to be put on pause now, which will make us all the more vulnerable. And the same as Maxim, he said, I come from a place called Vinica, which is a long way from the front line. But on his wedding day in 2022, that was targeted by Russian missiles. A lot of people were killed that day. It disrupted his wedding. Everybody has a story to tell,
Yeah.
even the ones who are here.
Ukrainians feel the war and all Ukrainians have a dream, real dream, to have a peace in Ukraine. But the second dream is to have guarantees that this kind of massacre mass wouldn't be happen again.
And of course, they're really worried. They're really worried that Trump is going to rush this peace. He's not going to put through the guarantees that they need, and then that they won't be able to stay. And they were both kind of robust men. But what about people who are old? What about grandmothers? Where do they then go? It's just a nightmare for so many people. Nobody knows what he's going to do next.
Yeah. Tell me about Russia. Tell me about Russians. You were there at the start of this war. What's their perspective on Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
So I'll tell you one interesting thing that I remember really clearly from speaking to someone in the Kremlin early on in my time there, before the war. And he said, you know what? Rural Americans and Russians in the regions are really quite similar. And I've thought about that a lot, and I think it's really true. They're very insular. They believe in, a strong Russia, a strong America. They don't have connections to the rest of the world. They kind of want strong leadership. And you can see why they therefore kind of believe in Putin and in Trump respectively, a lot of them. The big cities were always historically more anti-government. But I remember being incredibly surprised at the beginning of the war to see not just out in the regions, but amongst hipster Muscovites, this anti-NATO sentiment and this kind of, well, you brought it upon yourself idea. And I think as the war has worn on, people don't like it. They want it to stop, but they don't think that they're in the wrong. And they don't want to be in the wrong because it's easier to feel that it's not your fault. And at the same time, people are really tired of it. They're not as tired of it as people are in Ukraine, but the economic impact is starting to be felt. They've actually weathered it economically pretty well so far. But it is really hurting. And Russia is eating through its ammunition and its Soviet-era kit. I do think that Vladimir Putin will take an opportunity for a pause if he sees one. I don't think he'll want this war to end until he's, he believes in that Ukraine is his. But I think he'll take a pause if he can.
Yeah, we'll come on to other developments today, but while we're on the subject of you being in Moscow, you've been to Vladimir Putin news conferences. How do they work? Much talk about Donald Trump and the way that he works the media. Tell me about being in the room with Putin.
So he does not work the media like Donald Trump does. You don't get anywhere near him unless you are one of the favored few. I mean, imagine kind of Fox News gaggle around Donald Trump all the time and nobody else. Those are the people who get close to Vladimir Putin. But at the news conference where I was able to ask him a question, and once the war started, he didn't have international journalists near him for a really long time.
Yeah.
It was kind of post-COVID days, and so he was sitting a long, long way away. And it's all quite structured, and everybody from regional media has got these placards. You hold up a sign basically saying, please choose me, please choose me. And it's all choreographed by Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary. And so it's pretty exciting when your name is called out.
Do you see any similarities with Trump?
I see a lot of similarities in what they are doing to their countries. The way they treat the media at this stage is pretty different. But I think the fact that Trump is already saying about the Associated Press who've been kicked out of the Oval Office because they won't call it the Gulf of America. They call it the Gulf of Mexico. That's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Putin's been in power for 25 years. Donald Trump is, as he says, only just getting started. So what this will look like in 25 years is really quite scary.
The Ukrainian story has moved elsewhere. Next week, there will be negotiations in Saudi Arabia between the Americans and the Ukrainians. Zelensky is going to be in town meeting the Crown Prince. He says his negotiating team will stay on to meet with the American representative. Steve Witkoff will be there. He's Trump's property guy, property lawyer, come Mr. Fix-It. Did the deal in Gaza, and it's still a bit of a fixer-upper. He will be in Saudi Arabia. He's been speaking about building a framework for a peace agreement and an initial ceasefire. Let's hear from him.
I think it'll be a good meeting. I really do believe that. Hopefully that'll be a good signal to the Russians. because they have been proactive too in wanting to get something done here.
There are loose strands, Diana, I think. This mineral deal still unsigned. The Trump-Zelensky rift still ongoing, still simmering. Interestingly, Bloomberg, they're reporting that Trump, he is ready to sign the deal, but he wants add-ons. He wants Ukraine to agree to a tangible plan to stop the fighting and to negotiate with Russia. Apparently, Trump wants to avoid a situation whereby this mineral deal gets signed and then Europe and Ukraine, they drag their feet in agreeing a ceasefire. I wonder what they're thinking sitting in Moscow as they watch developments in Washington.
I mean, I think they couldn't be happier. This is like their wildest dreams come true. They just have to sit back and Donald Trump does it all for them. And you can get a sense of that because their rhetoric doesn't really seem to have changed about what their goals are or what they think of Zelensky. And I think the most insidious part of it is this narrative that Donald Trump has that Zelensky is somehow illegitimate and needs to be got rid of, which is just put into his mouth by someone via the Russians. And I don't know whether that's because of the conversations that Elon Musk, we know, has had with the Kremlin or where it's got to him. But interestingly, my friends from Fairfax today, the Ukrainians, kept on insisting on the fact that, elections are not possible for Ukraine under its constitution during wartime, because how can soldiers at the front fight? How can all the millions of Ukrainians who've left the country fight? What about the people in the occupied territories? How can they vote? But I just don't know whether that will matter to Donald Trump because he's got this bee in his bonnet that Zelensky needs to go. And sooner or later, somehow or other, if he pushes through this peace deal, I think that's what he wants. And that's what Putin wants too.
Yeah, as you make the point that it's almost as if Trump is doing the heavy lifting for Putin. Putin has almost outsourced the job of weakening NATO, fracturing the NATO alliance. So it's the worry, a continuing worry, and a worry, I suppose, that John Healey wanted to get a handle on the UK Defence Secretary when he came to Washington to meet his US counterpart, Pete Hegseth, today. They were asked, or Pete Hegseth was asked about Trump's pro-Russia stance, or a stance that leads towards Moscow. Hegseth dismissed that as garbage.
I think it's been very encouraging to watch our friends in the UK and in France step up to say they are prepared to take the lead to ensure an enduring peace in Ukraine. What the president has also said time and time again is, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get both sides to the table.
Might have been all pals at the Pentagon between these two, but as they were speaking, Diana, NBC were reporting that Trump was ready to recalibrate America's engagement with NATO. If a member state didn't pay up enough in contributions, the US might not defend them. That would be a significant shift, clearly, in Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. Trump has long indicated an impatience with NATO, and many think that he has a desire privately to leave it behind altogether. Listen to what he had to say in the Oval Office today.
Well, I've said that to them. I said, if you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend. I said that 7 years ago. And because of that, they paid hundreds of billions of dollars. I said, if you're not going to pay your bills, we're not going to defend you.
I think what was interesting there is that he makes the link between NATO and trade. Trade and defense tied into the same package. Do business with us, or we won't defend you. He's not saying that explicitly, clearly, with regard to NATO, but in NATO headquarters, they won't have missed the hit. Just look at how he operates in Ukraine on the mineral deal, which is a kind of, we'll help you, but money first. Talking about NATO countries, though, Diana, here's a question for you. When has Article 5 been invoked?
Ah, that's so cruel.
I'll give you a clue.
Yeah.
It was in the month of September.
9/11.
9/11. Yeah.
When Putin, incidentally, was the first leader to give his condolences to George Bush.
Well, there you are. And NATO allies, of course, came to the aid of the American president of that day, which is interesting because the American president of today seemed to forget that kind of element in history. He was talking about NATO, and he said of NATO allies, you think they're going to come and protect us? I'm not so sure. Well, read the history books, I would say, President Trump.
Well,
Anyway.
so what about Greenland though? That's the big Article 5 question, isn't it? If he took Greenland, NATO would supposedly have to come and take it back.
What are the chances of that, do you think?
0.
That's a podcast for another day.
Yes.
So you're a fan of tariffs, Diana?
Well, I'm not to be put on, but I'm quite enjoying the
The subject
toing and
matter.
froing.
Why?
I don't know.
Every day?
Maybe it's not so emotional for me. Ukraine and Russia feels very emotional. This feels more transactional. I wouldn't feel that way if I was in the auto industry.
Wait till
or
your
in
red
it.
wine starts costing more.
You know what? I spoke to, trying to find our Ukrainian friends today. I spoke to somebody who was Ukrainian Canadian. She said she was getting it from all angles at the moment under this new administration.
Of course, yeah, double whammy.
I know. I felt very sorry for her.
But yeah, tariffs back in the news again today, as they have been every day for the past month. It's because they change on a daily basis. Donald Trump now says there'll be a 1-month reprieve on the tariffs imposed on Canada and Mexico. A pretty significant U-turn from the administration. It started today with a Mexico announcement. Canada was left nervously waiting to see how they would fare, but tariffs have been lifted on both for just about 1 month.
Yeah, Trump said he'd spoken to the Mexican president, who he called a wonderful woman, and agreed to pause the tariffs out of respect for her, who in turn will intensify efforts to combat immigration and fentanyl. But he's not so complimentary about Trudeau in Canada, is he?
He's got Trudeau doll in his office, in the Oval Office, like 6 pins in, doesn't he? I mean, we see Trump reacting to the downside of tariffs. That's why we're getting this daily whiplash, because the stock markets are tumbling, industry's nervous. The pace of change has created a volatility which carries a very real threat of a number of consequences, including, of course, putting up prices for ordinary Americans. And that will be the rub for Donald Trump. In fact, Steve Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he spoke today, acknowledged that prices could go up temporarily. He said, this game of tariff whiplash isn't over, and that will be the crunch. If prices start going up in the corner shop, Americans will feel the pain and they will start to squeal. That's why Donald Trump was elected, to bring prices down for
Right
ordinary
down the price
Americans.
of eggs.
Yeah. Eggs, well, very much in the news.
Yeah.
If you were going to make a movie, what would you call it? About eggs?
Egggate.
Egggate. Are you joking?
Oh, that was dreadful.
You asked for that.
Quite good.
You asked for it. Well, that's, you'll be glad to hear, is a wrap for episode 47 of Trump 100. Diana, great to have you. Thanks very much for coming on. I have a hunch we might be doing this again soon because you're around for a few days, yeah?
Yeah, I am.
Great stuff. Do keep sending us your questions for our question and answer episode. It's always great to hear from you. That's all for now. See you tomorrow for episode 48.
Bye for now.